This session is a continuation of the Chapter 2 review with problem 17. And so 17 asks us to solve this equation and justify each step. So we have 15x plus 22 equals 7x plus 62. Again, that's given. And first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to combine my x terms on the left side. So we have 8x plus 22 equals 62 because we subtracted 7x from both sides, because that's a plus 7x. The inverse is subtraction. So that would be subtraction, property of equality. Then I'm going to subtract 22 from both sides. So we have 8x equals 40. Again, that's subtraction, property of equality. And then we're going to divide by 8. Which is division, property of equality. And now on to problem 18. Now for problem 18, we have 3 times the quantity, 2x plus 9 equals 30. So you might be tempted to just go ahead and distribute the 3 across. But in actuality, that's kind of wasting time, because we clearly have a 30 over here, and we could divide both sides by 3 and simplify that out. So we could have, if we divided both sides by 3, we would have 2x plus 9 equals 10. And that would be division, property of equality. And then that's all we have to do is subtract the 9, which gives us 2x equals 1. And that's subtraction, property of equality. And then divide by 2. So x equals 1/2, which is division, property of equality. Now, if you're not comfortable with that, we'll redo it using the distributive property, and we'll do that down at this point here. So I went ahead and copied this given statement down here. Now we'll distribute the 3 across. So 3 times 2x is 6x. 3 times 9 is plus 27 equals 30. And that's the distributive property. Now let's go ahead and subtract 27 from both sides. 6x equals 3. That's subtraction, property of equality. And then we'll divide by 6. So x equals 1/2, which is division, property of equality. So as you can see, there's any number of ways to do them. Whatever way matches your style, that's the way you should use. And let's move on to problem 19. In problem 19, it's just more of the same, just more of it. So Looks like the first thing we'll do here is go ahead and distribute the 2 across so that we can simplify. So we have 5x plus 2 times 2x is 4x. 2 times negative 23 is negative 46 equals negative 154. And that is distributive property. Okay. Now we'll combine our like terms, so we'll combine our x's here, and 5x plus 4x is 9x minus 46 equals negative 154, and we call this simplification or simplify. And next we'll go ahead and add our 46. So 9x equals negative 108, and that would be addition property of equality. And now we'll divide by 9. So we have x equals negative 12. And that was division, property of equality. This is an example of a simple 2-column proof to justify our steps. Statements on the left, reasons on the right. And let's move on to problem 20. In problem 20, we're asked to name the property of equality that the statement illustrates. So in this case, we have if LM equals RS and RS equals 25, then LM equals 25. So what actually happened here is we replaced the RS in this expression with the value of 25 because RS equals 25. That is called the substitution property of equality. So for 20, that's substitution property of equality. And I use the SUBST so that we don't get confused with subtraction or some other abbreviation. But substitution property of equality. Now for 21, in this case, the expression is exactly the same on both sides of the equal sign. Kind of like a reflection in a mirror. That's why it's called the reflexive property. Not reflective, but reflexive. So this is the reflexive. Property of equality. And now on to 22. In these 4 problems, again, we have a bunch of properties that we have to illustrate. So, problem 22, if angle DEF is congruent to JKL, then JKL is congruent to DEF. So that's all that happened was this swapped sides. When they swap sides, that is symmetric property of equality. So for 22, we have symmetric. Property of angle congruence, or property of angle congruence. Property of angle congruence. I don't like to write the whole thing out because it takes forever and I'm kind of lazy. So property of angle congruence. If you wish to write it out, that's perfectly fine. For problem 23, again we see the same thing on both sides of a symbol. And so this would be the reflexive property, but in this case, since we have angles and we're dealing with congruence, this is the reflexive property of angle congruence. So 23 is reflexive property of angle congruence. And now on to 24. 24 tells us if MN equals PQ and PQ equals RS, then MN equals RS. Now this should look familiar to you because it's very similar to what we did in the last chapter called the law of syllogism. In a syllogism, this would be the hypothesis, conclusion. The conclusion of the first becomes the hypothesis of the second, which leads to a second conclusion, and then the first hypothesis leads to the second conclusion. In this case, we call this the transitive property, and this is the transitive property of equality because we're dealing with equality here, the equality of segment lengths. So for 24, this is the transitive property of equality. Okay, now on to problem 25.